I'm Sarah Whitman, 29 years old. And just 3 weeks ago, I stood in my grandfather's hospital room and watched the only real parent I ever had take his final breath. 2 days later, I pulled into the driveway of the house where he raised me carrying a bag of breakfast and thinking about which room to start cleaning first. I never made it through the front door. The locks had been changed, and the woman who left me behind as a child was standing inside like she belonged there. When I held up his will, she laughed and said, "You have nothing here. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to fight for something that should have already been yours." My grandfather's name was Harold Whitman, a retired high school English teacher who wore flannel shirts and always smelled like cedar and coffee. When I was 8, my parents split in a divorce that felt more like an escape plan. My father took a job across the country, and my mother, Brenda, decided she needed a fresh start that didn't include being a single mom. She met a man named Martin a few months later, someone who made a lot of money and had no interest in raising a child that wasn't his. One Friday evening, after another argument about her being gone all the time, she packed a suitcase and drove me to Grandpa's place. She said it was just for a few weeks. That was the last time I lived under her roof. Grandpa never made me feel like a burden. He cleared out his office so I could have a bedroom, built a swing from the old maple tree in the yard. He helped with homework every night and taught me how to plant tomatoes, change a tire, and balance a checkbook. He used to say, "Family isn't about who shares your blood, it's about who shows up." That little 2-bedroom house in the Portland suburbs became my whole world. The walls filled up with school photos and soccer trophies. My mother would send a card every now and then, $50 in the envelope, maybe a phone call around the holidays, but she was already 3 hours north by then, living in Seattle with Martin and building a different kind of life. When I graduated from college, Grandpa sat in the front row with tears in his eyes. I stayed close after that, rented a tiny apartment downtown and visited every weekend. Then 2 years ago, he got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I moved back in without hesitation. I cooked his meals, managed his appointments, and made sure the last season of his life felt safe. He didn't like to talk about death, but one night, while I was adjusting his pillows, he looked at me and said, "This house gave you a foundation once. I want it to do that for you again when I'm gone." I didn't want to talk about it then, but he insisted. "Brenda will try to make trouble," he said quietly, "but everything's been arranged with my attorney. It's all in writing. This place belongs to you." When he passed away on a gray Tuesday morning, I could hardly breathe. The only thing that kept me going was knowing he'd planned everything down to the details, including the funeral and the reading of his will. I was still in shock when I sat across from Brenda in the attorney's office. Benjamin Reynolds' grandpa's lawyer of over 40 years read out the terms. The house, his belongings, a small insurance policy, all left to me. Brenda's face was a tight mask, but when we stepped into the hallway, she leaned in and hissed, "You manipulated him when he was sick. This isn't over." I didn't have the strength to argue. A friend of mine, Rachel, offered her spare room while I took a few days to grieve and sort things out. I figured it was safer than going straight back to the house. That was my mistake. 3 days later, I drove back with coffee and bagels, planning to start sorting through Grandpa's clothes. I walked up the stone path, turned my key in the door, and nothing. The deadbolt was new. When the door finally opened, Brenda was standing there in a blazer, like she was hosting an open house. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "This isn't your home." And behind her, Grandpa's recliner was gone. That was the moment I realized this wasn't grief anymore. This was war. The bagels were still warm when I left Rachel's place that morning. I pulled into the driveway with coffee in one hand and keys in the other, ready to start sorting through the kitchen, maybe clear out some of Grandpa's old clothes for donation. The curtains in the front window stopped me cold. The old blue ones he had had for decades were gone. In their place, clean beige panels I'd never seen before. Something was off. The stone path to the front door felt unfamiliar, like I didn't belong there anymore. I slid the key into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again, wiggled it, checked that I hadn't grabbed the wrong keyring. Then I noticed it, an extra deadbolt recently installed. I knocked, first lightly, then with more force. After a long pause, the door opened, and there stood Brenda. Her hair was done makeup fresh, dressed in a sharp navy blazer, like she was heading into a meeting. She looked at me like I was a stranger. "Sarah," she said flatly, "what are you doing here?" "This is my house," I said, still holding the coffee tray. "Grandpa left it to me." She didn't step aside. "Your grandfather and I had an understanding," she said. "This home's been in the Whitman family for 3 generations. He always intended it to stay with his daughter." Martin appeared behind her, hand resting on her shoulder. "We've already spoken to our attorney," he added. "Harold wasn't in his right mind when that will was made. All those medications, he was confused. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't." The living room behind them was stripped of half its furniture. Grandpa's recliner, the one with the fraying armrest and the old quilt, was gone. So were the photo frames that used to line the mantel. "He was lucid," I said, finally finding my voice. "He told me this house was mine. I have the will." I pulled it from my purse, unfolded it with shaking hands, and held it out. Brenda barely glanced at it. "Papers can be changed," she said. "What matters is what he told me. I'm his daughter. You're just his granddaughter. I took care of him for 2 years," I said. "Where were you on a cruise? Sending birthday cards and forgetting to call." Martin stepped forward. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said. "I'm not leaving," I said. "This is my house. You're the ones trespassing." Brenda's smile thinned. "You have nothing here," she said. And with that, she slammed the door in my face. I stood there on the front step, coffee in one hand, bagels cooling in the other. Through the living room window, I saw them return to their packing. They didn't even pause. They didn't look back. I sat in my car and called Benjamin Reynolds' grandpa's attorney. He was in court, but his assistant promised he'd call back. I called Rachel next. My voice cracked as I tried to explain what had happened. "They've taken over the house," I said. "They changed the locks. They're taking his things like none of it ever mattered." Rachel offered to come pick me up, but I needed answers. I drove to the police station hoping they could help. The officer I spoke with was sympathetic, but the law was clear. If you have a dispute over a will, he said it's a civil matter. You'll need to go through the courts. We can't enforce property claims without a court order. By the time Benjamin returned my call, I was parked outside a coffee shop, unsure what to do next. He was furious. "This is absolutely unacceptable," he said. "The will is airtight. I can personally attest to Harold's sound mind when it was signed." "What do I do now?" I asked. "I don't have the money for a long court fight." There was a pause on the line. "We'll file for an emergency eviction," he said. "But I won't sugarcoat this. It may take time." And Brenda, she's playing dirty. That night I returned to Rachel's apartment. This time, it wasn't a choice. It was my only option. I lay on the pull-out couch, scrolling through old photos. Grandpa in the backyard, holding up a tomato plant. Me standing beside him in my cap and gown. The two of us building the bookshelf in the hallway. I couldn't sleep. The next morning on my way to work, I drove by the house, just to see. A moving truck was in the driveway. Brenda and Martin were lifting Grandpa's antique desk into the back, the one where he graded papers, the one where he used to help me with homework. I pulled in and blocked the truck with my car. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted, climbing out. "That's not your desk. It's listed in the will." Brenda didn't even look up from her clipboard. "We've already discussed this," she said. "Go to work. This doesn't concern you." Martin stepped toward me again. "Move your car." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police. This is theft." Brenda's expression changed. She pulled out her own phone. "Yes, I need to report a trespasser," she said calmly. "She's being aggressive." I froze. She was calling the police on me. At the house I grew up in. The house that was legally mine. When the officers arrived, I showed them the will on my phone. But just like before, they said it was a civil dispute. "We understand your frustration," one officer said gently. "But unless there's a court order identifying you as the sole property owner, we can't intervene. They told me to move my car. I did." In my rearview mirror, I watched them load the desk onto the truck. At work, I couldn't focus. During lunch, I called Benjamin again. "They're clearing the house," I said. "By the time we get to court, there'll be nothing left." "This strengthens our case," he said. "They're clearly acting in bad faith." He also told me something else. Brenda had hired Victor Sullivan. I knew that name. He had a reputation in Portland for being aggressive and willing to bend the rules. "He'll try to drag this out," Benjamin warned. "He may even claim you influenced your grandfather." I didn't respond. The thought of anyone accusing me of manipulating Grandpa was too much to bear. That night, I sat up with a spreadsheet. Rent, student loans, groceries, now legal fees. My savings would only stretch so far. Rachel's cousin, a real estate attorney, agreed to meet with me over coffee. She couldn't take the case, but she gave me some advice. Document everything she said. Photos, lists, receipts, witnesses if you have them. I did. The Hendersons' grandpa's neighbors for over 20 years. I remembered them clearly, how they always waved when I pulled into the driveway. That evening, I drove over and knocked on their door. Martha answered and hugged me the moment she saw my face. "Oh, Sarah," she said, "we've been worried. We saw them over there coming and going. Inside, they told me everything. They'd heard Grandpa say multiple times that the house was meant for me. They were willing to write statements and testify if needed." "He was so proud of you," Martha said, holding my hand. "The way you took care of him." As I stood to leave, Arthur mentioned something that made my stomach drop. "They put up a for sale sign this morning," he said. "Didn't waste a minute." I drove around the block to see it for myself. There it was, Grandpa's home listed with a high-end real estate agency. The sign staked into the lawn like a flag in conquered territory. They weren't just taking the house. They were planning to sell it before I could stop them. The real estate sign was angled slightly in the lawn like it had been planted in a hurry. A white rider above it read, "Virtual tour available." I parked across the street and stared at the house. The curtains were still drawn, the driveway empty. But it didn't look like Grandpa's place anymore. Not with that sign out front. Back at work, I tried to concentrate, but my mind kept drifting. During a meeting, I caught myself writing out numbers on my notepad: loan payments, rent, the cost of legal fees. Afterward, my boss pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I gave her a vague explanation about family issues. She told me to take the afternoon off. I drove straight to the listing office, pretending to be a potential buyer. The agent was polite and upbeat, said the sellers were motivated, and mentioned they'd already received multiple inquiries. When I asked about the home's background, she told me it was part of an estate transition, same family for generations. Now time to let it go. There was no mention of a will dispute, or that the granddaughter of the previous owner was locked out of the property. That night I brought it up with Benjamin. He was already drafting the paperwork to stop the sale, but we both knew time wasn't on our side. We needed something stronger. He referred me to a real estate attorney named Diana Fairchild. Her office was small, tucked into the back of an old brick building downtown. She read through everything I brought: the will, Grandpa's death certificate notes from the Hendersons, and sat quietly for a long moment. "What you need," she said finally, "is a lis pendens." I didn't know the term. "It's a legal notice," she explained. "It tells the public and any potential buyers that this property is tied up in a legal dispute. It clouds the title. No reputable buyer will touch it once it's filed." She said she could prepare it by the next day. That evening I stayed up late, going through boxes I'd taken with me from Grandpa's closet during those final weeks. I was looking for anything, cards, emails, notes that could back up what he'd told me about the house. I found birthday cards from past years. One of them from my 25th said, "Can't wait to see you turn this old place into something new. It's meant for you, Sarah." I took a photo of the message and added it to the folder I was building. The next morning, Diana and I went to the county recorder's office. I signed the list pendens and watched the clerk stamp it. She told me that once it was recorded and served to the listing agent escrow company and opposing counsel, it would officially block the sale. Afterward, I sat in my car and opened my email. I'd remembered something the night before, an old shared folder Grandpa had once sent me when he was organizing his taxes. I hadn't thought much about it at the time. Inside that folder was a scanned document labeled Journal 2022. It wasn't long, maybe 15 or 20 pages, just a Word file. But as I started to read, I felt the breath leave my lungs. One entry said Brenda came by today, first time in years. Asked a lot of questions about the will. She seemed surprised the house wasn't already in her name. I didn't tell her I've left it to Sarah. No point stirring anything up just yet. Another one, Sarah's been helping me in the garden, reading to me at night. She's the one who's been here. She's the one I trust. He hadn't written it for court. He hadn't known it would ever be read aloud in front of strangers. That's what made it so powerful. I sent the journal to both Benjamin and Diana. Later that evening, while I was searching through Grandpa's files again, I found something else. Something I hadn't known existed. A video file, labeled for Sarah, Christmas. It had been recorded on his phone the winter before he passed. He was sitting in his chair near the tree, the old wood paneling behind him, soft light coming through the window. "Sarah," he said, looking straight into the camera, "I'm not sure if you'll ever watch this, but just in case something happens, I want you to know how I feel. This house, it's yours. It's always been yours." He talked about the porch swing, about the room I used to sleep in, about how he hoped I'd plant tomatoes again in the spring. When the video ended, I didn't move. I just sat there, the laptop screen glowing in the dark. The next morning, Diana called me. The listing had been updated. "Pending sale," she said. "Closing date set for next week." She sounded calm, but I could hear it in her voice, urgency. "We filed the list pendens, but if they found a cash buyer or if someone's ignoring the warning we need to move fast, I'll contact escrow today." I spent the afternoon organizing everything I had, witness statements, photos, recordings, documents, and saved them in a shared folder. That night, I went back to Rachel's apartment and opened the photo albums I'd brought from the house before everything went wrong. There were old snapshots of me and Grandpa at the county fair, sitting on the porch baking Christmas cookies in that tiny kitchen. In one photo, Brenda stood beside Grandpa, both of them younger, smiling. For a second, it didn't match the person she had become over the past few weeks. But whatever she used to be, she wasn't that anymore. The next day, I received a text from Martha Henderson. "People are in the yard measuring things. 2 men with clipboards. Looks like a surveyor or contractor." I forwarded it to Diana. She called me within 5 minutes. "They're moving too fast," she said. "Either they're ignoring the list pendens or trying to rush a sale through before anyone catches it. I'm filing for an emergency injunction today. I didn't know what would happen next. I just knew the fight wasn't over." Diana was already on the phone with the escrow company when I pulled into the parking lot outside her office. She motioned for me to come in and waited until the call ended before speaking. "They've been notified," she said. "The lease pendens is on record. Legally, the sale shouldn't move forward without full disclosure." I sat down across from her, not quite ready to relax. She glanced at the folder I had brought, then back at me. "What you found last night, the journal, the video, it's strong. That changes the tone of this entire case." I nodded and opened the laptop I'd brought with me. The file was already queued up. Grandpa's voice filled the room the moment I pressed play. He was sitting in his chair by the window, the Christmas tree glowing in the background. His posture was tired but upright, his voice soft but clear. "Sarah," he said, "this house, it's yours. It's where you belonged then and where you belong now." He spoke slowly, choosing every word. Mentioned the swing he built in the backyard, the maple tree, the garden beds along the fence. He talked about how the house had shaped his life and mine, and how he wanted me to be the one to carry it forward. "I know your mother won't like it," he said, glancing down for a second before looking back at the camera. "But this isn't about her. It's about what's right." When the video ended, the room was quiet. Diana didn't say anything at first. She closed her notepad, reached for the folder, and tapped it once. "I want this filed with our injunction," she said, "and we'll need to get copies of the journal entries to Benjamin. These pieces together tell the story. They confirm what the will says and give the court a window into your grandfather's state of mind." I left her office feeling steadier than I had in weeks, not because anything was resolved, but because now, for the first time, I wasn't the only one who had heard Grandpa say it. On the way home, I stopped by the Hendersons' place. Martha answered in her gardening gloves, dirt smudged on her sleeve. "I've got something to show you," I said. She followed me to my car, and I played the video again on my phone. She didn't say a word while it played. When it ended, she reached out and gave my hand a quiet squeeze. "That's Harold," she said softly, right down to the last sentence. That weekend, I stayed off social media and spent most of my time going through boxes. I found more cards and emails, little things I'd forgotten about, notes he'd written in the margins of gardening books, grocery lists with my favorite snacks scribbled at the bottom. Everything I found, I photographed and sent to Diana and Benjamin. Monday morning, Benjamin called. He'd spoken to the title company and confirmed the closing hadn't gone through yet. But a buyer had made a formal offer, and a closing date was still on the calendar. "They're pushing it forward despite the lis pendens," he said. "I'm filing the emergency injunction today." That afternoon, I got a call from Rachel while I was at the office. "There's something going on at the house," she said. "I just drove by. There's another moving truck in the driveway. I left work early and drove straight there. As I turned onto the block, I saw Brenda standing in the driveway, clipboard in hand. Martin was by the truck supervising two men carrying boxes. I pulled over across the street and took a photo from the window before calling Diana. "They're emptying the place again," I told her, "even after everything we filed. I'll notify the sheriff's office," she said. "We'll add it to the affidavit. But unless they're actively committing theft, it's still a civil matter." I stayed in my car until they left. That evening, I was going through Grandpa's scanned files again when I came across one more document I hadn't noticed before. It was dated 6 months before he passed. A handwritten letter, never sent, addressed to Benjamin. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs. "If anything happens to me before Sarah moves into the house, please make sure she has everything she needs. She's the only one who's shown up. This house means something to her. It always has." I forwarded it to both attorneys immediately. No explanation, just the file. The next morning, Diana called with an update. She'd spoken to the escrow officer directly. After reviewing the lis pendens and learning about the pending injunction, they had frozen the sale. That afternoon, Benjamin confirmed that the emergency hearing was on the docket. We had 4 days. In the meantime, Diana suggested I prepare a complete inventory of everything I remembered being in the house before Brenda and Martin moved in. She said it could help recover lost items later if we could prove what had been removed without permission. I made the list from memory first, then added photos I'd taken over the years. Grandpa's antique clock in the hallway, his bookshelf filled with classic novels, the carved birds on the mantel. That night I emailed Martha and Arthur and asked if they'd be willing to come with me to court if needed. They said yes without hesitation. Before I shut my laptop down, I opened the video one last time. Grandpa sitting in that chair looking straight into the camera. "I want you to make it your home," he said. "Not just because I'm gone, but because you were the one who stayed." The screen went dark and I sat in the quiet for a long time. Diana's voice was calm but tight over the phone. "We just heard from escrow," she said. "The buyer's side has gone silent. They haven't responded to the lice pendens or acknowledged the injunction filing. That's not standard behavior." Benjamin joined the call from his office. "I've been digging. The buyers aren't who they appear to be. They're tied to Martin's investment group. Not direct relatives, but close enough that we're likely dealing with a setup. They're using straw buyers," Diana said, confirming what I was already starting to suspect. "It's not illegal on its own, but combined with a rushed sale and suppressed disclosures, it's highly questionable. We made a plan. Benjamin would file the emergency injunction that afternoon. Diana would contact the escrow officer again and request written confirmation of the hold. My job was to gather any final pieces of documentation and check in with the Hendersons about potential court testimony. As I packed up my things to leave work early, my phone buzzed. The messages were from Brenda. "What do you think you're doing with all this legal drama? You're only hurting yourself. The sale is happening. There's nothing you can do to stop it." Then another one. "You've made an enemy of the wrong person. I'm your mother. I know all your weaknesses." I didn't reply, just took a screenshot and sent them straight to Diana. She called back minutes later. "Do not respond. This actually helps us. She's aware of your legal position and trying to intimidate you. Judges don't take kindly to this kind of behavior." Saturday morning, Benjamin picked me up and we drove to the house. A sheriff's deputy was meeting us there. It was time to serve Brenda and Martin with the formal court documents. When we pulled up, the same moving truck I'd seen earlier in the week was back in the driveway. The front door was wide open, and boxes were stacked in the entryway. The deputy walked up first and knocked with the back of his hand. A moment later, Martin opened the door. Mr. and Mrs. Wallace, the deputy, began holding a stack of papers. "You're being served with legal documents regarding the estate of Harold Whitman." Martin tried to argue, but the deputy cut him off. "Refusing service won't change the process. You've officially been served." Brenda stepped into the doorway. Her expression hardened the second she saw me standing at the edge of the walkway. "You're making a spectacle," she said under her breath. "The neighbors are watching." "You left me no choice," I said. "You're trying to take what doesn't belong to you." "This house was supposed to be mine," she snapped. "He promised it to me long before you were born." "Then why did he leave it to me in writing?" I asked. "Why did he say so in a video? Why did he document it in his journal?" Her expression shifted just slightly. "What journal?" "The one he kept during the last year of his life," I said. "The one where he described your sudden interest after years of silence." Martin's posture stiffened beside her. "Your grandfather was confused," he said. "You were alone with him. It's easy to influence someone when they're weak." "We have neighbors who saw Sarah care for him every day for 2 years," Benjamin said, stepping forward. "Witnesses with no interest in this case, just truth. The court will weigh that against whatever paid testimony you plan to bring." Brenda's voice rose. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed. This house was my backup plan, my security. He had no right." "You had 20 years to be part of this home," I said quietly. "You chose to walk away." A car pulled into the driveway just then. A couple stepped out, early 50s, both dressed casually. Behind them, a real estate agent gathered brochures from the front seat. They slowed when they saw us standing there. The agent glanced at Brenda. "Should we come back later?" Benjamin stepped forward before Brenda could speak. "I think it's important you understand what you're stepping into," he said, introducing himself. "I represent the legal heir of this property. There is an active legal dispute involving ownership, and a lis pendens has been filed with the county." The couple looked at each other. Benjamin handed them his card. "Any sale will be challenged. If you proceed, you'll be tied up in litigation. I strongly recommend you perform your own due diligence. The agent tried to speak, but the man held up his hand. We're not interested in a mess, he said, and the couple turned back toward their car. Brenda's face went pale. You just cost us everything, she said. Why the rush to sell? I asked. What's really going on? Martin tried to pull her back inside, but she stepped forward. His business is underwater, she said. We were behind on everything. We needed the money. This sale was the only way out. I didn't say anything. Just stood there while she looked at me, eyes tired, makeup smudged. He left it to you, she said finally. His own daughter, and he left it to you. Benjamin's phone rang. He stepped away to answer. When he returned, he nodded once. The buyers have formally withdrawn their offer, he said. The listing is suspended pending review. Brenda sat down on the front step. Martin paced the driveway, barking into his phone. As Benjamin and I walked back toward the car, Brenda looked up. You think this is over? She said. Victor will tear you apart in court. Benjamin didn't flinch. That may be, he said, but I've never lost a case with this much truth behind it. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Benjamin at a small cafe near his office. We were still going over the schedule for the court hearing when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered and put it on speaker. Miss Whitman, the voice said. This is Victor Sullivan. I represent Brenda Wallace. Benjamin looked up from his notes, calm. I'd like to discuss a potential resolution before Monday's hearing, Sullivan continued. My clients are prepared to vacate the property voluntarily and acknowledge your ownership under certain terms. Benjamin leaned forward and mouthed the word, progress. I didn't say anything at first. Just waited. What kind of terms? I asked. They would like 48 hours to remove their personal items and request that no further legal action be taken over minor furnishings. We'll need a detailed list of what they plan to take, Benjamin said. Nothing belonging to Harold Whitman leaves without Sarah's explicit approval. Sullivan agreed to send over the list by morning. When the call ended, Benjamin closed his binder and let out a slow breath. They're folding, he said, and they're doing it before we've even stepped into the courtroom. The courtroom was quiet except for the soft shuffle of papers and the occasional click of a pen. I sat beside Benjamin at the petitioner's table, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Across from us, Brenda sat stone-faced, dressed in a dark jacket. Her attorney, Victor Sullivan, flipped through his folder without looking up. Martin wasn't there. Judge Eleanor Winters entered without fanfare, her presence calm but firm. She looked over her glasses and asked both sides to state their appearance. Then she got straight to it. I've reviewed the filed will, she said. The lis pendens, the emergency injunction, and the supplemental materials submitted on behalf of Ms. Whitman, including the video and journal entries from the decedent. She paused, looked between the two sides, and continued. Based on the clarity of the legal documents and the additional supporting evidence I am granting the injunction, there will be no transfer or sale of the property until this case is resolved in full. I exhaled, but she wasn't done. Furthermore, I am ordering that Mrs. Wallace and any individuals residing with her vacate the premises within 72 hours. They are to remove only personal belongings. No furnishings or items listed as part of the estate may be taken without the petitioner's written approval. Brenda didn't move. Sullivan nodded, quietly leaned over and whispered something in her ear. As the judge finished, she glanced at me. Ms. Whitman, I appreciate the thoroughness of your documentation. Your grandfather's intentions were made quite clear. With that, the hearing ended. We stepped into a smaller conference room just down the hall. Sullivan joined us, his tone now businesslike. My clients will comply with the vacate order, he said. They request 48 hours to remove their remaining belongings and would like to avoid any further confrontation. Benjamin nodded. We'll need an itemized inventory, and we'll have a deputy present during the move. Nothing leaves that house without Sarah's approval. We shook hands and that was it. No apology, no explanation, just the legal path laid bare. The next afternoon I pulled up to the house with Benjamin, Rachel, and a uniformed deputy. Brenda and Martin were already outside, stacking a few boxes near a rental truck. Their movements were efficient, quiet. The air between us was tense but civil. Inside the house felt hollow. The walls were bare in places where photos had once hung. Shelves were empty. The cabinet that had always held Grandpa's coffee mugs was open and stripped clean. I walked room by room with a clipboard checking items off a list. The deputy stayed close by watching as Brenda packed what appeared to be clothing and framed art that hadn't belonged to Grandpa. I asked about the bookshelf in the study, his personal library, that once filled the entire wall. "They've been donated," she said. "Some were sold." I didn't reply, just made a note and moved on. In the corner of the study, the oak desk still stood. It looked untouched. Brenda lingered by it, her hand resting on the edge. "He used to help me with homework here," she said almost to herself. "Before I left. Before everything got complicated." She didn't say more, just stepped back, picked up the last of her boxes, and walked out the front door without looking back. The deputy confirmed their departure. The truck pulled away without incident. We stayed behind. Benjamin called the locksmith, and within the hour, every lock on the property had been replaced. He handed me the new set of keys wrapped in a plain white envelope. Rachel walked through the living room beside me, quietly taking in what remained. "They took a lot," she said. I nodded. The clock in the hallway, the bird carvings on the mantel gone. A clean rectangle remained where Grandpa's war photo once hung. "But they didn't take the house," she added. We stood in silence for a while. The air inside still held the scent of cedar and old paper. Even stripped bare, it felt like Grandpa. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table, writing out a list of missing items for our records. Just as I was finishing, my phone buzzed. "Check apartment 307 at Parkview on Burnside. Code 4829. No name, no explanation." But I had a feeling I knew who sent it. The next morning, I drove over. The building was older, a little worn around the edges. I rang the buzzer and asked for the property manager. "They moved out yesterday," she said when I asked about Brenda. "Left in a hurry. We're still trying to track down the last month's rent." I told her my name and explained the situation, showed her my ID. She led me down to a storage room in the basement. One unit still had boxes inside, labeled in marker Herald stuff. I opened the first one. Inside were Grandpa's books, a photo album, his magnifying glass, his gardening gloves. The manager looked at me and nodded once. "You can take what belongs to you." I loaded everything into my car and drove home. That evening, I spread the books out across the living room floor. I found my college graduation photo tucked into one of the back pages of his favorite poetry collection. A few hours later, Benjamin called. "Your mother has officially withdrawn her claim," he said. "She's signed the legal acknowledgement of your ownership." "It's over, Sarah." I thanked him, said goodbye, then walked out to the front porch and sat in the swing Grandpa built when I was 10. The house was quiet, but it was mine now. The next morning, I walked through the house slowly, room by room. The floor still creaked in the same places, and the sunlight still filtered in through the east-facing kitchen window, warming the floorboards just like it used to. But the space felt different, quieter, stripped. Grandpa's presence lingered in small details, the faint outline of his clock on the hallway wall, the empty hooks where his gardening tools used to hang, the grooves in the door frame where he'd once measured my height in pencil. But the shelves were bare. The carved birds from the mantel were gone, the framed photos from the stairwell missing. Even the old quilt from the back of his recliner had disappeared. Rachel came by in the afternoon. She stepped into the living room and looked around. "They took more than I expected," she said softly. I nodded, but not everything. In the dining room, I had laid out what I'd recovered from the storage unit. Grandpa's books labeled in his handwriting, a wooden keepsake box filled with old letters and his war medals, photo albums with dates written in faded ink, his leather-bound address book with worn corners and ink smudges. I set each one out carefully, like I was returning them to their rightful place. That night I opened one of the albums. On the first page there was a picture of Grandpa and Brenda taken long before I was born. She was maybe 16, standing beside him on the front steps, grinning with her arms crossed. He had one hand on her shoulder, and they looked happy. I turned the page. There was a photo of me in Grandpa's garden, barefoot in the dirt, holding up a crooked tomato plant. He was kneeling beside me, sun hat on, laughing. Later, I found a note tucked inside the cover of a book he had once read to me as a child. It simply said, "Plant what feeds you. Give it sunlight. Trust that it will grow." 3 days after Brenda and Martin left Portland, Benjamin called with a final update. "She's dropped all claims," he said. "It's official. Your name is the sole one on title, no contest pending." I thanked him and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. The legal fees had added up. I'd had to pick up a second job on weekends, working evenings at a local bookstore, but Benjamin had worked out a long-term payment plan. Still, the cost wasn't just financial. It sat deeper than that, somewhere in the space between relief and exhaustion. I started going to a support group a few weeks later. It was Rachel's idea. A group for adult children who'd experienced estrangement. The first night, I listened more than I spoke. People shared about fractured relationships, quiet grief, and learning to rebuild from broken places. One evening after a meeting, I stayed behind to speak with the facilitator. She was in her 60s, kind eyes and steady voice. "You're grieving a lot more than your grandfather," she said. "You're grieving a version of your family that no longer exists." I thought about that for a long time after I got home. Some days I'd come across a piece of paper in a drawer, Grandpa's handwriting, a shopping list, a weather note, a reminder to check the back fence. Other days I'd open a cupboard and catch myself expecting to see his coffee mug on the shelf. The texts from Brenda stopped after she left town. The last one came 3 months after the hearing. "You're still my daughter. Can't we just move on from this? Family should stick together." I didn't respond right away. I let it sit for 2 days, then replied, "Family is who shows up, who stays, who puts in the work." She never answered. I kept the boundary clear. When necessary, we communicated through Benjamin, mostly about legal cleanup or old documents that still needed to be signed. But there were no more phone calls, no holidays, no, "How are you?" The neighbors remained a steady presence. Martha brought banana bread on Sundays. Arthur helped me replace 2 fence boards that had rotted over the winter. "Your grandfather would have been proud," Arthur said, brushing dust from his jeans. "Not just of the house, but how you stood your ground." The study slowly became my home office. I kept Grandpa's oak desk right where it had always been, rearranged his books by subject, botany, poetry, history, and added a few of my own. One evening while working late, I received an email from Diana. "Have you ever considered law school?" she wrote. "You have a natural instinct for justice, and now you have first-hand experience with what that means for people who don't have someone fighting for them. It wasn't something I'd ever imagined for myself, but the thought stayed with me." That week, I bought a set of LSAT prep books. I kept them on the edge of Grandpa's desk, stacked neatly beside his crossword puzzles and the old radio he used to leave on during the evenings. The house was quiet but steady, and it was mine. Spring arrived slowly that year, the kind of spring Grandpa would have liked: cool morning, soft sun, the smell of damp earth rising from the garden beds out back. I cleared the old leaves from the soil and planted fresh tomatoes just like he taught me. Basil, a few rows of green beans. Each afternoon, I'd walk the yard with a cup of tea, checking on new growth like he used to. Inside the house had started to feel like mine. The room still held echoes of him, his tools in the garage, his old radio on the kitchen counter. But there was space now for me, too. I repainted the hallway a soft shade of sage, rearranged the bookshelves in the study, framed one of his handwritten notes and hung it above the desk. I worked during the week and studied in the evenings. Law school still felt far off, but the idea had taken root. I kept my prep materials neatly stacked in the corner beside Grandpa's magnifying glass and the photo of us from my college graduation. Rachel stopped by often. The Hendersons checked in like clockwork. And Benjamin, well, he still called every month to see how things were going, even after the paperwork had long been finalized. I hadn't heard from Brenda since that last text. She and Martin had moved to Arizona. I wasn't sure where, and I didn't ask. Part of me thought she might reach out again someday, but I also knew that if she did, it wouldn't be to apologize. It would be because she needed something. I didn't carry anger the way I used to. What she did had consequences, real ones. But there was also something hollow in her that I couldn't fix, and I had stopped trying. One evening, I found myself back on the porch swing, the one Grandpa installed when I was 10. The same swing where he'd once read aloud from old books, where we'd shelled peas in the summer, or just sat watching the neighborhood pass by. The breeze carried the scent of lilacs from the side yard. I closed my eyes and let it settle over me. I thought about everything that had happened. The will, the courtroom, the night I stood outside my own home, keys in hand, locked out by the very person who had walked away years before. And how piece by piece I'd taken it back, not just the house, but my place in it. The real inheritance wasn't the title deed or the square footage. It wasn't the garden or the desk, or even the quiet peace of a home that finally felt safe. It was what Grandpa left in me, the strength to stand up when it counted, the patience to fight with dignity, the reminder that love isn't measured by blood, but by presence, and that family shows up, stays, and makes room for healing. If you're still listening, I hope you take this with you. Protect what matters, speak up when it counts, and don't let anyone rewrite the truth of who you are or what you've built. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones closest to home, but they're also the ones that shape us the most. And if you've ever had to draw a line with someone you loved, or rebuild after someone tried to take what was rightfully yours, know you're not alone. Feel free to share your story in the comments. It might be the thing someone else needs to hear. And if this journey meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and stay connected. We all carry stories like this, quiet battles, quiet victories, and there's always room for more voices around the table.